Welcome back everybody to the LVFR A340-300 for Microsoft Flight Simulator, the third and final tutorial in this full flight series from Madrid down to Tenerife North. Right at the end of the previous episode we discussed and planned and set all of the data for our descent into Tenerife North. We've brought our range ring in now to the 160 value. And you can see actually, just before I drop that again, we're about to reach top of descent. So everything remains the same. In 20 miles we begin our descent. So we're going to set 6,000 as we discussed earlier. And about 5 miles or so before reaching top of descent, we're going to enter managed descent. So we're going to push the altitude knob in. We've got our low auto brake set and all that sort of stuff too. Just waiting into the descent, we get a more accurate QNH figure using one of the preset weather conditions that I've got here at the moment. But the temperature is 23 degrees at Tenerife North and the wind around 7 knots. I'm not sure of the direction of travel yet, as a bit of a preset. Now you can see the VOR2 says we're 100 miles away. That should give us a fairly smooth and gentle descent into Tenerife North. So just as we get to 5 miles now, we'll push into managed descent just to make sure we're in that mode. And as we cross the top of descent marker, we enter our descent. Now you notice there it's snapped into quite a strong descent. If you don't want it to do that, what you can do is go into open descent and change your vertical speed to a much nicer figure. Starting at 0, and you can just gradually increase that to the value that you want it to be. And I'm actually going to maintain 1,800, 2,000 foot per minute in the descent at the moment. And I'm going to use speed, selected speed mode, Mach 80 initially. We're going to now manually change the speed. Now the circumstances that you face when you're in your descent might mean that you keep it all in managed mode. You might want to change the vertical speed and leave the auto throttle to set its own speed. It's all down to you as the pilot to manage all of this. And if you want to go into manage mode again, you can just press or push the altitude knob in and it will go back into a managed descent. Now something's going to change with the aeroplane as we cross flight level 245. The trim tanks are now going to automatically transfer fuel forwards for the approach, so that we've got a more forward center of gravity for landing. So when we cross flight level 245, which will be momentarily, we should then see on the ECAM here, trim tank transfer forward, as a message appearing around where that no smoking sign is now. Now this process is going to continue throughout the descent, and it'll either be finished before our final approach, or it will continue until we select gear down. And at that point the transfer process, if it's still happening, will stop. In the managed descent mode, the aeroplane will try and slow down to around 240 knots at about 11,000 feet. But the LVFR A340-300 will try and maintain its descent profile, so you will need to use the speed brake where necessary to make sure the speed remains below 250 knots, below 10,000 feet. And the ILS procedure is going to be the same as most of the other Airbus aircraft. We're going to use the LS button to put the ILS diamonds onto the primary flight display. We're going to use the approach mode. So here comes flight level 245. We can see Tenerife in the distance now. And there's our ECAM memo for trim tank transfer forward. So it's now working to push the fuel forwards to give us a change in centre of gravity. You can see there the gross weight centre of gravity is actively moving more forwards to assist in our descent and our final approach. You'll notice we're descending on idle, and our speed at the moment can't reach 270 knots because of the rate of descent. So as we mentioned a moment ago, we can just deploy some speed brake to assist with that, down to the 50% mark, and we can just keep an eye on the speed. And as we reach our rough speed target there, we can get rid of the speed brake. So we return that back to 0. Monitoring everything as we descend. Now, of course, if we got vectors for whatever reason, we would use heading mode at this point to go and vector ourselves elsewhere. We'd need to manage our speed and our descent profile accordingly with that too. It's worth pointing out that currently the LVFR A340-300 does not support auto land, and it cannot currently do a GPS, RMP or RNAV based approach. So it's an ILS approach or the more manual VOR NDB style approaches, which are all down to kind of the pilot's inputs anyway, or a visual approach are the only ones we can do at the moment. If we need to initiate a go around, we just quickly review the charts once again. You can see there on the charts, climb on heading 115 degrees from the lock center to 6,000 feet, maximum speed 185 knots. Then turn left direct to the VOR and join the holding. So we need to set 6,000 once again for our missed approach when we begin our ILS approach. And now become a bit more clear nearer the time. 16,000 feet, flight level 160 is coming up, 28 miles to Tenerife North. We know we've realistically got about 40 track miles to go, so we're on profile for our descent. And as we reach Tenerife North, we'll be closer to that 11,000 feet altitude target, and the aeroplane is going to begin to want to descend. So we're going to extend the speed brake, continue the descent through 10,000 feet, turn those landing lights on, and we'll monitor the aeroplane in the turn as we head out on that downwind leg, as we discussed in the previous episode. We can see the airport down there below us, nestled between the mountains. It's a beautiful approach here in Tenerife. The QNH on the preset is 1006. We're going to make sure we've got the performance page ready to go. Currently in the descent section, because we need to activate approach phase momentarily. Approaching flight level 110, there's the speed reduction. We're going to now extend the speed brakes to about half, and I'm going to select vertical speed to continue our rate of descent. 1800 foot per minute with speed brake extended should have us below 250 knots, but if you're not certain, go to 1600 foot per minute. There's the turn. Basux is the next waypoint now, so we want to be at 6,000 feet by Basux. And you can see the approach page has now automatically selected. If you want to just double check that, you can head to, for example, the flight plan page and then go back into the perf page. If it automatically goes to approach, which it has, you know you're on the approach phase. So we've overflown TFN, Tenerife North VOR, and now heading back to the outbound, that downwind leg. Going to round that off to 1400 foot per minute, letting the speed creep off all the time. I'm going to select 220 for managed speed, so selected speed, sorry, so that we can now control the speed that the aeroplane wants to fly at. Now, as we pass flight level 70, that's our transition altitude. QNH is 1016, sorry, I made a slight error earlier. We're going to now go to the local QNH, which is 1016. If it says QFE, push it again with the up arrow there to reselect QNH, make sure it's set to the correct figure. Which it is, and now we're at 6,500 feet. Leveling off. So just prior to reaching 6,000, I'm going to reduce the rate of descent just to keep it all smooth. We want the landing lights on and the seatbelt signs on. Runway turn-off lights, nose lights to TO. So, quick check of the overhead panel, no white lights, everything's set as required, lights and signs are all set. Auto brake set to low. Speed brake is retracted. We're now going to arm that ground spoiler. 220 knots, which is just above our green dot speed, and that's our minimum clean. We reduce through that, we want to make sure we go to flaps 1. If we go to managed speed, it will target green dot. I'll show you kind of both of those there. So we've done a little bit of selected speed mode, and now we're going to do the remainder of the flight on managed speed. Typically, for an ILS approach, 8 miles to 12 miles as a range. As you enter 12 miles, you want to reduce the speed to 180 knots until 8 miles. At 8 miles, you want to reduce the speed to 160 knots until 4 miles. At 4 miles, reduce your speed to final approach speed, which is VAP. In this case today it says there 148 knots. LS mode can come on now, ready for the final turn. It says just Cat 1. And the frequencies and the 4-letter there, the identifier for the ILS matches, showing 20 miles range. So at this point, the aeroplane is beginning to make its turn towards the waypoint Basux for that extended final approach. So it's doing a good job of maintaining the speed in the turn there, but I want total control of the speed in this scenario. So I'm going to go to 216, which is what it was flying at anyway, and I'm going to go back to selected speed mode. Now if air traffic control said reduce to speed 180 until 8 DME, we would do that. And to reduce the speed any further, we would need to extend our flaps. As we cross Bassocks at 6,000, we want to then set another descent down to 4,000. All the while monitoring our progress in the turn. Now at this point, prior to the next little descent that we're going to do, I'm going to select flap 1. That's going to allow me to reduce our speed a little bit more. So I'm going to now select speed 200 knots. I'm going to get 4,000 feet ready. And you'll notice now it just disappeared for a little while because we were far away, but now we're starting to get a bit closer. The ILS data on the primary flight display and the nav display has come back onto the screen, showing 25 miles. We don't want to decelerate too early. We're still quite a way out, so I'm actually going to stay as we are, 200 knots. Bassocks is coming up. As we cross Bassocks, we'll go into another descent down to 4,000 feet. And at this point, I'm going to press approach to intercept the ILS. So lock is green, it's captured. Glide slope is blue, it's armed. We're below the glide slope. There's the vertical guidance diamond there that's just come into the display, and we're now past Bassocks, and we want a gentle descent to 4,000 feet. (1,000 foot per minute) at this speed's probably suitable. Now the airport appears, because of the terrain, as if it's higher than we are, but it's fine. That will settle down as we get a bit closer. So stick to what it says on the charts and you'll be fine. Notice how the trim tank transfer forward memo is still active. And that's because it's still working to shift our centre of gravity as far forward as it can prior to touchdown. The fact that the CG value isn't really changing very much there suggests that it's pretty much finished, and that memo will likely go away when we go gear down. Just going to increase the rate of descent now to 1,200 foot per minute. We'll keep the speed at 200 knots for a little bit longer, until 12 miles. Then we will change the speed to 180 knots. Almost at 4,000. Round that back to 1,000 foot per minute. Alt star. Leveling off. The terrain is almost a trick on the eye, isn't it? trust the data. $14 miles coming up. So speed brakes armed, auto brake set, park brakes off, flaps 1 is currently selected. The missed approach altitude is 6,000. $10. I've let us creep a little bit closer. Now we're going to bring the speed to 180. The nose is coming up quite high, so we're going to go flaps 2. And there's no dual autopilot support, so we just leave it as autopilot 1 and approach mode active. Glide slope still armed, we're waiting for that vertical guidance to creep down towards us. There's the airport. The height's looking a little bit better now for us. Now down to 160 knots. Lap 3. Gear down. Final check of the overhead panel. Lights, signs, speed brake, flaps, auto brake. Gears down. Green and locked. 6 miles, full flaps. Nose comes forward to begin our descent. Glide slope's now captured. And we will maintain 160 knots until 4 DME, 4 miles there on that display. Now we're in the descent, we can set 6,000 for our missed approach. Really important we do that. Never set the minimums for a descent on the ILS, because it will then destabilize the aeroplane and you'll get a false altitude capture at minimums, which is obviously what you don't want. 4 miles now. And we're going to set 148 knots. We have to do that in selected speed mode currently. A little bit of wind shear just around the mountains here has meant it's lost the glide slope.
2,000.
But when you feel comfortable, if you notice it's doing that and it's struggling, turn the autopilot off and hand fly the aeroplane.
1,000.
The auto throttle in the Airbus remains in until touchdown, at which point we idle the throttle just prior to touchdown in the flare, and then we activate reverse with weight on wheels. Here we go.
500. 100 above. 400. Minimum.
Continue.
300. 200.
Well, a visual approach pretty much now at this point, ignoring the glide slope.
100.
50 foot roughly over the
40,
threshold.
30,
Looking ahead. Idle the throttle.
10, retard, retard, retard.
Touchdown. Okay, reversers. Letting that nose gently come down. Touchdown. 80 knots. Through 60. We can get rid of the reversers. Tap the brakes to remove the auto brake. And then we can vacate below 50 knots onto this exit, gently braking as we vacate. Bit of a steep turn coming up, so remember the principles from the taxi out at Madrid, less than 10 knots. And because this is a long aeroplane, you want to allow the nose wheel to come away from the yellow line a little bit, because we're actually turning to keep the main wheels over that yellow line. As we turn, strobe lights can come off, landing lights off, nose lights to taxi, runway turn off lights off. Still monitoring the turn. We're going to select flaps up and speed brakes disarmed. That's going to retract all of the flaps and speed brakes. And then we're going to taxi to our stand here at Tenerife North. Now we're getting a bit closer to our gate. We want to start our APU. So master switch goes on, wait for 3 seconds. APU start. Pop our transponder onto automatic or off, depending on your preference. And just prior to parking up, we're going to turn the nose light off. APU is available, APU bleed comes on, and then we begin the turn into stand. Using a remote stand today. Again, allowing that nose wheel to come over the yellow line, because we're turning to maintain the yellow line between the two big main wheels. And then nice and slow up to our parking point. Like so. Park brake goes on. Making sure the APU bleed is online, we can then shut down the engines. And we can start from right to left, turning them all off, like so. And then the engines will spool down. Beacon lights off, seatbelt lights signs off. And then once again on the ground services page, we can connect things like the GPU, add some stairs, open the doors and add the cones. And there you have it. 3 episodes covering cold and dark, engine start, taxi, takeoff, climb, cruise, descent, an ILS approach with a visual and manual landing, followed by taxi in, parking and shutdown. I hope you've enjoyed the 3 episodes. Hit like, hit subscribe, and share your thoughts down in the comments below. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the skies. Take care.